The moment the hospice nurse pressed a folded note into my palm and whispered, "Read this alone, tonight, before your son-in-law gets there," I felt something shift beneath my feet, like the ground I had been standing on was never as solid as I believed. I had been at St. Catherine's every afternoon that week. My daughter had been moved to the palliative care wing on a Tuesday, and by Thursday the halls already felt familiar. The nurses knew my name. They knew I took my coffee black and that I arrived before visiting hours officially started, because the woman at the front desk, Bethany, had a soft heart and let me in early without making a fuss. I would sit beside my daughter's bed and hold her hand and talk about small things, the azaleas coming up in the backyard, the cardinal that had started visiting the feeder I hung outside the kitchen window the spring before. Anything that was not the diagnosis, not the prognosis, not the look on her husband's face when the doctors talked. Her name was Annalise, my only child, 44 years old, and still the girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my old Buick on long drives home from her grandmother's house, her cheek pressed against the window, her breathing soft and even. She had her father's dark eyes and my stubborn jaw, and she had survived more than most people would ever understand. The cancer was in its third stage when they found it, and by the time they told us the full picture, the window had already narrowed. Her husband, Prescott, had come into her life 6 years earlier. I had tried in the beginning to see what she saw. He was attentive in public, knew when to refill her water glass, knew when to laugh at the right moments. But there were smaller things I noticed that I never said out loud. The way he spoke over her in group settings, the way he tracked the family finances with a kind of hunger that did not match the income he claimed to have. The way he looked at her house, her inheritance, the property I had signed over to her 3 years ago when my knees made the stairs difficult, as if he were already calculating square footage. Annalise never wanted to hear any of it. She loved him, or she had decided to, and because she was my daughter, I respected that even when it cost me sleep. The nurse's name was Wren. She was somewhere in her late 30s, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of stillness that comes from spending years in rooms where everything matters. I had seen her every day that week. She was always professional, always calm. So when she stepped close to me in the hallway just outside the room, her voice low and careful, I paid attention in a way I might not have otherwise. "Read it alone," she said, not in front of him. Then she walked back down the corridor as if nothing had happened. The note was folded into a tight square, no bigger than a matchbook. I slid it into the inside pocket of my cardigan, against my chest, and went back into the room where Annalise was sleeping. Prescott sat in the chair near the window, scrolling through his phone with his ankle crossed over his knee. He glanced up when I came in. "She's been out since noon," he said. His voice was flat, like reporting weather. I sat down on the opposite side of the bed and took her hand. It felt lighter than it used to. Everything about her had become lighter, smaller, as if she were slowly becoming something the air could carry. We did not speak much, Prescott and I. We had stopped pretending we needed to a long time ago. He left at 5:30 to get dinner. He always left at 5:30, never asked if I wanted anything, never looked back from the doorway. The moment his footsteps faded down the corridor, I took out the note. The handwriting was small and deliberately neat, as though the person writing it had fought the urge to rush. "She asked me to give you this when you were alone. She made me promise not to give it to you while he was there. I'm sorry it took me this long. I was afraid." Below that, a phone number with a 704 area code, Charlotte, and beneath the number, 3 words. "She knows everything." I read it twice. Then a third time. My throat went dry. Annalise was still asleep. Her chest rose and fell with the slow, medicated rhythm I had grown used to. The monitor beside her beeped softly, indifferently. "She knows everything." About what? I folded the note back along its original creases and put it in my pocket. I sat with her until 7, until the light outside the window had gone from orange to gray to dark. Then I kissed her forehead, gathered my coat and my bag, and drove home to the house I had been sleeping in for 39 years. I did not call the number that night. I made myself wait. I do not know why, except that some part of me understood that once I called, certain things would become impossible to undo. I made toast I did not eat. I watched the news without hearing it. I sat in my husband's old armchair by the front window. the one I had kept even after everything else changed, and I held the note and the phone number and thought about my daughter's face. The last time she had been truly awake, the last time her eyes had focused on mine with something urgent in them. She had started to say something, and then Prescott had come through the door, and she had stopped. I had thought it was the medication. At 9:15 the following morning, I called from the parking lot of the hospital before going inside. It rang twice. Then a man's voice answered. Quiet, careful. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. I asked us. My name is Desmond, he said. I'm an attorney. Your daughter retained me 8 months ago. I closed my eyes. She didn't want him to find out, Desmond continued. She knew if he did, he would find a way to stop what she was trying to do. What was she trying to do? I asked. A pause. Not a hesitation exactly, more like he was choosing where to begin. Protect you, he said, and undo the damage before she ran out of time. The call lasted 30 minutes. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot with the engine off and the windows beginning to fog, and I listened to a story that felt at once completely foreign and somewhere beneath the shock, entirely expected. Prescott had been moving money. Quietly, in amounts designed not to trigger alerts. The joint accounts he and Annalise shared, the household account tied to her inheritance, the investment account she had set up before their marriage, which he had insisted be made joint after the wedding. He had told her it was about partnership, about building something together. She had believed him, or tried to. For 2 years she had attributed the discrepancies to confusion on her part, to the fog of illness, to paperwork she had not had the energy to review carefully. Then, 8 months ago, she had sat down with everything laid out in front of her, every statement, every transfer, every withdrawal, and she had understood. He was preparing for death. He had been for a long time. He had also made inquiries, Desmond told me, about the property. My property, the house he was now effectively living in while caring for his dying wife. The house I had transferred to Annalise with the understanding that it would remain in the family. Under Georgia law, Desmond said, if the property had no trust or transfer on death deed attached, and if Annalise died before those documents were completed, Prescott as surviving spouse could make a legal claim. My chest tightened. Annalise had known. She had spent the last 8 months working with Desmond to put the documents in order, to establish a trust in my name, to create a legal structure that Prescott could not reach. And she had done all of it without telling me, because she knew I would have confronted him, and she had wanted to handle it quietly, without a war, without whatever retaliation he might have had in him. She had been protecting me, even from a hospital bed. When I finally went inside that morning, I walked past the nurse's station and caught Wren's eye. She gave me the smallest nod, nothing more. I went in and sat beside Annalise, and she was awake. Not fully, but her eyes were open, and when she turned her head toward me, there was recognition in them, clear and present. Mom, she said. It was barely a word, more like a shape her lips made. I know, I said. I held her hand. I spoke with Desmond. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, but something that had been held very tight, beginning to loosen. He's good, she said. Her voice was slow and careful, like she was choosing each syllable with the last of her energy. He'll finish it. I told her I knew. I told her she didn't have to worry. I told her that I had spent 44 years worrying about her, and it was her turn to rest and leave the worrying to me. She almost smiled. Don't let him see your face, she said. Not until it's done, I promised. Prescott arrived at 11. I was sitting in the chair near the window when he came in, the same chair where I had seen him sit 100 times before. I had my hands folded in my lap and my expression as smooth as I could manage. He looked at me and then at Annalise, who had drifted back to sleep. Anything change? He asked. No, I said. He nodded and sat down and pulled out his phone. I watched him from the corner of my eye, this man who had shared a bed with my daughter for 6 years, who had held her hand in the oncologist's office, who had cried at the right moments and said the right things, and who had been quietly, methodically dismantling her financial security while she fought to stay alive. I kept my face exactly where I had promised to keep it. The days that followed moved like water under ice, slow on the surface, fast underneath. Desmond called every evening. The trust documents were nearly complete. A transfer on death deed for the property was being drawn up. There were 2 accounts that still needed intervention, Funds Prescott had moved into a separate account tied only to his name, funds Annalise had transferred in the year before her diagnosis, when she trusted him entirely and believed he was managing their futures. Those were harder, Desmond said, but not impossible. On the fourth day, Prescott asked to speak with me alone in the family consultation room down the hall. I almost said no. Instead, I followed him. He sat across from me at a small round table with a box of tissues in the center that nobody had moved. He had the practiced expression of a man preparing to say something difficult. "I think we both know things are getting close," he said. I waited. "I want to make sure we're on the same page about what happens next." He folded his hands on the table, mirror of how I was sitting. "Administratively, with the house, with her accounts, I don't want there to be confusion during an already painful time." I looked at him. "I've had my attorney take a look at everything," he continued, "just to understand the landscape. Given that the property was transferred to Annalise, and given that we are legally married, there are certain things I'm entitled to consider." My stomach dropped, but I held my face. "I'm not trying to be callous," he said. "I just want clarity. I think you'd want the same." I said very quietly that I had always appreciated clarity. He nodded. He seemed satisfied. He said that he thought the easiest path would be if I agreed to certain arrangements in advance, that it would spare us both from legal complications, that it would be what Annalise would have wanted, a clean transition, no fighting. He said Annalise's name like it was a card he was playing. I said I would need to think about it. He said he understood. He said he knew this was hard. He said that at the end of the day, we both wanted what was best for her. When I walked back to her room, I was shaking, not from fear, from something closer to fury, held down so tightly it had nowhere to go. That night I called Desmond from my car and told him what Prescott had said, word for word, as best I could remember. "That's the move I expected," Desmond said. He did not sound surprised. "He's trying to get you to agree to terms informally before the legal documents are finalized. If you agree to anything verbally in front of a witness, it complicates things." I told him I had not agreed to anything. "Good," he said. "We need 4 more days." I asked what happened in 4 days. "The trust is filed and recorded. The deed is recorded. Once that happens, it doesn't matter what he says or who he's talked to. The legal structure is already in place." 4 days, I said. "Don't let him pressure you. Don't argue with him. Don't confirm anything. Don't deny anything. Just keep the surface calm." I said I had been keeping the surface calm for the last 6 years. I thought I could manage 4 more days. Annalise died on a Wednesday morning, just before 6. The room was quiet. The light coming through the blinds was the thin gray of very early morning, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. I was there. Prescott was not. He had gone home the night before at his usual time, and I had stayed, because I always stayed, because she was my daughter and I was her mother, and that was simply the order of things. I held her hand. I talked to her about the azaleas. I told her the cardinal had come back to the feeder that morning, which was not true, but felt true, the way certain things do at the end. Then she was gone. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone. When I finally walked out into the hallway, Wren was at the nurse's station. She looked at me and then looked away, and I understood that she already knew. I went to her and took her hand for a moment, and she held mine back briefly without saying anything. I called Desmond from the parking lot. "It's done," I said. I meant both things. My daughter, and the work she had spent her last months finishing. "I know," he said gently. "The trust recorded yesterday afternoon. You're protected." I sat in my car and did not cry right then. Grief is strange that way. Sometimes it waits for you to be still enough to hold it. Prescott arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after I called him. He was composed in the way people are when they have rehearsed composure. He went in to see her and came back out and said the things people say. I nodded. I was very tired and I was very careful. He brought up the arrangements within 48 hours. We were sitting in my kitchen at the table my husband had built 30 years ago from reclaimed barnwood, and Prescott set a folder in front of me. Printed documents, marked with sticky tabs, a pen placed on top. "I know the timing is terrible," he said, "but some of this is time sensitive." I looked at the folder. "My attorney says if we can agree now, we can avoid a lot of the probate process, given that the house was in Annalise's name." "It isn't," I said. He stopped. The house is in my name, I said. It has been legally since the 15th of last month. He looked at me very carefully. The folder sat between us untouched. I don't think that's right, he said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it now. I think there may have been some confusion about the paperwork. There was no confusion, I said. My attorney filed the transfer on death deed and the trust documents 10 days ago. They've been recorded with Fulton County. You're welcome to verify that. He was silent for a long moment. Annalise did this, he said. It was not a question. I did not answer. She did this without telling me. His jaw tightened. Without any conversation, she told me, I said, in the way she could. He pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to me, and for a moment I could not read him at all. When he turned around, something had shifted in his face, not grief, something harder. You have no idea, he said, what I put into that marriage, what I gave up. I looked at him steadily. You sat with her, I said. I'll grant you that. But you were also counting what you would leave with, and those are not the same thing. He left without the folder. His attorney contacted Desmond the following week. There were challenges, there were letters, there were several weeks of back and forth that I will not reconstruct in full because the details belong to lawyers and not to the story I am trying to tell. What I can say is that the documents held what Annalise had built in those last 8 months, quietly, carefully, with more foresight than I had any right to expect, held. Prescott eventually withdrew his claims. I do not know exactly what Desmond said to his attorney or what the cost-benefit calculation looked like on his side of the table. I only know that one morning in October, 2 months after my daughter died, Desmond called me and said it was over. I planted azaleas along the back fence that fall. The cardinal came back, or one very much like it, and I watched it from the kitchen window while I drank my coffee. I thought about Wren and the folded note. I thought about Annalise in that hospital bed using what she had left to make sure I would not be the one standing in a parking lot with nothing. I thought about the way she had held my hand in reverse. When she was very small, her whole fist wrapped around 2 of my fingers, trusting completely that I would not let go. She had learned that from somewhere. I like to think we learned it from each other. There is a thing that happens when you lose someone and then discover the lengths they went to in order to protect you after they were gone. It does not make the loss smaller, but it changes the shape of it. It becomes something you carry differently. Not like a weight, more like a letter you keep in your pocket, something you can return to, something that still holds the warmth of the hand that wrote it. I am 68 years old. I live alone in a house I have lived in for almost 4 decades, and I know every creak in the floorboards and every place the light lands in the late afternoon, and exactly which drawer sticks in the kitchen when the humidity is high. My daughter is gone. That is the truest and hardest thing. But she was here, and she loved me with everything she had, right down to the last thing she was capable of doing. And so I stay. I keep the feeder filled. I answer the phone when Desmond calls to check in, which he still does once a month because he is that kind of person. I walk the yard in the mornings and I put my hands in the soil and I let the ordinary work of living remind me that I am still here, which is, in the end, exactly what she wanted.